Today on Cosmic Disclosure, we are with Randy Cramer, who claims to have been part of military interplanetary missions. Welcome, Randy.
Thank you, Emery.
Does the covert military space program have bases on other planets?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I certainly couldn't name all of them because there are dozens or probably even hundreds at this point, but oh yeah, for sure.
What comes to mind in our solar system?
I would say that any planetary body that we could put a base on, or any satellite of a planet that would be a strategically good place to have one, is a place where we have one. Any place that we could or would need one, we have one at this point in the solar system.
How are these constructed? Are they on the surface? Are they inside, underground?
Most of the time, most of the construction is underground for safety and defensive purposes, and they're, depending on the facility, will depend on how much juts out of the rock or out of the ground. But I would say that the largest percentage of these facilities are subterranean usually.
Can you describe some of your missions, these covert missions that you were on these planets? I know you went through a lot of them.
Yeah, well, there's actually a conflict in the Cassiopeian system where a friendly species was encroached upon by an aggressor species who had purchased some military technology from someone else. And because we already had a trade relationship with them, they essentially, picked up the phone and called us and asked for help, and we sent some troops and were deployed there.
And what other kind of missions did you guys do? Like, what was the agenda, you think?
Most of the time when I was engaged in off-world missions, it was high-value targets. So it was either extract someone that you want to keep alive or kill someone that you want dead.
Have you killed any extraterrestrials in your lifetime?
Oh, God, countless. I honestly couldn't tell you the number. It's so many.
What was it like being at war, in combat, against extraterrestrials?
Well, interestingly enough, any time that I've ever had to take the life of another human being, there's some emotional wrestling, whether it's remorse, guilt, or I wish I wouldn't have had to do that. But I have to be honest, when you're in a military conflict with another species, I've never had a problem with it, never had issues with remorse. In some cases, I hate to say it this way, but sometimes it's the same as killing a monster. Like, you wouldn't debate or feel bad about killing a monster. So something that's completely not like you in a military theater situation where everyone's trying to kill each other, it's pretty easy, to be honest with you.
Just a target.
Just a target. Just a moving, breathing target at that point, yeah.
You said the word monster, so now I'm thinking, what did some of these look like?
Well, I would say that occasionally we're dealing with intelligent species, and sometimes you're dealing with less intelligent species, which could be described as animal or even like monster type life forms if they're big enough. If it's big enough, we just call it a monster.
Right.
You could be talking about large insects, large reptiles, large amphibioids, as well as species who are similar to us or incredibly different. We could mean different limbs, cephalopods. It's a pretty wide range.
Did you ever encounter, during combat, an extraterrestrial species that could get in your mind, or that was talking to the troops, or getting in there to make them turn on each other, or to mind control you?
Well, certainly when we engaged with the indigenous reptoids on Mars, they were actually very psionic species, and so their ability to get inside our heads, sometimes make us see things that weren't there. That was probably the number one thing that we would do, or they would do. A number of times we would encounter this, a fog that you couldn't see through that was like pea soup, but we'd have the intelligence officers who were looking at other cameras telling, there's nothing there, there's nothing there. But we're like, well, I can't see 6 inches in front of my face, so it's here as far as I can tell. But that was all, psionic illusion, so them just putting the images in our mind so it seemed as real as it would be as if it were real.
Let's describe psionics to the audience here, because I know a lot of people don't know what that is.
Simple definition of psionics is your mind powers. So any ability to focus mental energy, to alter matter energy, is a psionic ability.
So they're obviously a master of telekinesis because they can move projectiles.
Oh yeah.
That means they can probably move you.
Oh yeah. I observed a what I would say, a small division of indigenous reptoids bring down a draconian drop ship at speed into the ground so that when it slammed into the ground, it broke into millions of pieces. And they did that with a psionic telekinetic grab and pulled it right down to the ground as a group.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah,
Was it a group, effort?
Yeah, all their hands went up at the same time, went down at the same time, and as they made this motion, the ship just slammed into the ground. And I need to emphasize, at speed. They didn't just bring it down to the ground. They threw it into the ground at speed so that when it hit, it just broke apart into millions of pieces.
Were there people in there?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The drop ship had already sent out a small battalion of draconians that were decimated by this reptoid battalion. And then as the ship tried to leave, they just grabbed onto it and slammed it right back into the ground.
What is a draconian?
Oh, draconian is another reptoid species, but they tend to look more like a crocodile or an alligator. So they got a long snout, dark green skin. Some of the higher echelons can have wings, can be winged. Some of them can be very tall. As a species, they tend to be the a-holes of the galaxy and very aggressive. Their main tactic and strategy is fear, and so they love to make people feel like they're super strong, super terrifying. Oh, they're so powerful, we can't possibly beat them, but they bleed like everything else. And so once we started to understand that their main tactic was to make us feel intimidated, we became less intimidated. So they're not so much of an issue. I mean, they're militarily challenging, but we have certainly met them in the field of battle and won. So.
These indigenous reptoids, what was the language like?
Well, I think the most important distinction is they have a different tongue and a different palate. So the sounds that we make, we may not think about it, are very unique to our tongue and our palate. They're sounds that are biologically distinctive to what the physiology of our mouth and our tongue and our lips can do. So in the same way, the sounds that they make for their language really are dependent on that biological relationship, again, between mouth, teeth, tongue, palate, and so forth. I would say a lot of their language involved sort of guttural sounds, some kind of hissing sounds, as well as clicks. It's important to note that if I were to say anything in their language, even though you wouldn't hear it, I would be saying it with a Terran accent because I can't actually make the exact sounds because I don't have the same tongue and the same palate. But their name for the planet is not Mars. We call it Mars. They call it Galuka.
Wow. Very deep.
Yeah, and again, to be honest, I'm saying that very badly. So if an indigenous reptoid were here saying that, if heard me say that, he'd look at me sideways and go, because
Right.
they hate it when we mispronounce their words.
Did you talk and communicate a lot with them using vocal?
They mostly spoke in English, to be honest with you, again, with an accent because of the tongue and the palate, and their English was actually pretty good. And I learned a few words, but we were not encouraged to speak their language because they're very picky about pronunciation. And if you can't pronounce the word right, they'd rather you didn't say it. It's offensive to their ears, and they get very rubbed the wrong way when you say words wrong.
Does sound affect them?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Are they sensitive to frequency and sound?
They have really good hearing. I mean, I would say they have kind of like dog hearing. They can hear, in upper registers and lower registers that we don't hear for sure. So if our, audible hearing spectrum, is this, their audible hearing spectrum is probably that.
What do they eat?
The indigenous reptoids actually eat a lot of salamander tail. There's these giant salamanders, and they cut the tails off and then prepare the tails in a number of different dishes that include fungi, lichens, grasses. I've described their food as tasting mostly like mud, but it's an acquired taste as well, and it's very nourishing food, but it's not exactly, what we as mammals would consider tasty.
Right. Do they eat humans?
The indigenous reptoids on Mars do not. They do not eat human beings. I have heard stories that draconians will eat anything or anyone, just about whatever food is available.
Have you been on a draconian ship?
I've been inside one. I wouldn't say that I've been on one. There was one that had been on the ground. The forces that had come out of it were decimated. The ship was disabled, and then we stormed the ship and killed everything and then left.
Could you tell the audience, when you walked in there, what did you smell?
Rotting flesh.
Let's talk about
Death.
that.
I mean, it was it was not a pretty smell at all, for sure.
Yeah, I've noticed on a lot of these crash sites that they have rotting, many different kinds of species and meat,
Yeah.
rotting in these big bays.
Yeah.
Did you see anything like that?
Yeah, and apparently, as I've been told, that's how they like their food. They like their food warm, rotten, warm, and that's the way they like to eat food. So.
Another thing is, when you went into this, did you have a suit on at one of these? I mean, of course you have your suit, but did you have a full, helmet on and
Absolutely.
everything? Because one of the questions people are going to ask, well, how did you smell? And there are ways to do it in the suits,
right,
with hearing and smelling. Maybe you can explain it to them.
Well, the suits themselves are not a space suit. It's an environment suit. So it's not exactly completely, totally, and absolutely airtight. So there are residual smells and things that can, get into the suit. So a pungent odor, if you're within the space of a pungent odor for more than a few minutes, you're likely to be able to start smelling it.
Some people speak of, mining expeditions to these places and also going there and controlling ET civilizations. Have you heard of this?
Well, certainly we're involved in the mining business. So, we certainly, there's already companies that are doing asteroid mining and anywhere. I know that there's mining on Mars. I can't say everywhere there's a mining operation, but I would suggest wherever there's a mining operation that's profitable, the mining companies are going there.
Were military forces deployed on these areas to protect miners at any time?
Absolutely.
And why is that?
Well, depending on where you are, you just might be somewhere where there's, again, hostile animals or a hostile species, someone that doesn't necessarily want you there. There's also just, random things that can show up. And if you don't have someone there to, be prepared, can cost miners their lives because miners aren't fighters.
Well, Randy, thanks for joining us on the show today. It's always a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
I'm Emery Smith, and this is Cosmic Disclosure. Until next time.